Welcome to Voices of Gender Equity, the podcast where we deep dive into real and raw stories of impact. We're your hosts, Ashley McGrath.
And I'm Henry Cooper.
And each episode, we're aiming to inspire and influence you, our listeners, into action by bringing you authentic conversations, success stories, and practical advice.
Join us as we amplify the voices of individuals from all walks of life, activists, scholars, CEOs, and everyday champions sharing their journeys, insights, and strategies for driving meaningful change.
So, whether you're a seasoned advocate or just beginning to explore this crucial topic, Voices of Gender Equity is your space to listen, learn, and engage. Joining us on today's episode is Sharyn O'Neill. Sharyn is the Public Sector Commissioner for Western Australia. Sharyn and her team are focused on developing a future-fit public service for the people of our state. So we know your name and we know where you work and what you do, Sharyn, but I'd love to just set the scene for our listeners a little bit, on who is Sharyn O'Neill.
Yeah, sure. So, long-term public servant, as you said, where I work. I was a teacher by trade. So started off country schools, which I loved. I have a son who's 28, just turned 28, which is fantastic. We're beach people, so we live by the ocean.
Nice.
That's our happy place, our sad place, our everything place. We love going across the Rottnest in the boat. He catches crayfish, we come home and cook it for lunch.
Oh, nice.
Our holidays, so that's sort of our family scene is coastal. 3 brothers, they're all terrific in their own right, famous in their own right. But to me, they're just brothers. Yeah, so that's kind of where I come from. Family from Perth. I've lived in Perth, or I've lived all around Western Australia. Had a chance to go and work in the east, but we just like the lifestyle here.
Yeah.
So that's us.
That's what I hear about from a lot of people. I'm originally from New York, so I absolutely,
Great place too.
yeah, it is. It's a great place, but I love it here. Just the weather, lifestyle as well. I've just really settled here, which is great. And just off of that, I wanted to ask you, within your career and how long you've been doing this for. Has there ever been like an experience or any kind of moment that has kind of steered you into the direction of enhancing and advancing gender equity?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to wind back further because people often ask if there's something in your career that sets the scene for you, for life. But for me, I would say way earlier than that. So my dad was a policeman. He was often home doing house stuff because he was a shift worker. So it was really normal for me for Dad to clean, iron. He's now 93. He still does my ironing. Just saying.
Is he looking for new customers?
No, he doesn't need to take on any more work.
Darn it.
And so it was really normal for me to see this sort of division of labour, if you like, even though cooking was still my mum's deal. So then when I'd go to other people's houses, it would look different. So it started a curiosity. I didn't have a language for it. I didn't even know it was a thing, but it was curious to me that their dad would arrive at the dinner table, having done nothing, and then leave the dinner table and go and watch TV, and other people were in the kitchen. I just thought that was kind of curious. Also, it struck me later, I was still a child, but it struck me later, I was always doing everything that the boys did. So I was required to bait my own hook, I'd pull the fish off, I'd cut the guts, that was all very normal to me. But as I got a bit older, I realised that most girls didn't do this stuff. And so it was this ongoing curiosity, really, for me. So for me, it happened much earlier than my career. I wouldn't say I was advocating, but I do have a quite personal school story that I can share if you're interested.
Oh, please do.
That really set the scene for me.
Yeah.
Hope I don't get in trouble with this. But I was in high school, right, and I was studying Japanese and German. We were at a language school, and it meant our timetable was strange. I had to make up a timetable. I had to do woodwork with the year 10 boys.
Yeah.
who just consistently, now you'd call it harassment, but consistently I'd go into the storeroom and they'd get, long pieces of wood and flick my skirt up. And I just found it just supremely irritating. You didn't have the language then, right?
Sure.
But it happened forever. And I'd come into class and they'd sawed the leg off my chess table I was making and they'd fill the holes with glue. And again, just found it irritating. I was used to boys. And so then one day it just really flipped for me. I'd had enough. So I walked up to the bench, got this mallet, walked up to a boy called Philip. He will never forget. I won't say his name.
If you're listening, Philip.
He knows who he is.
He won't forget this moment. And I walked right up to him and gave him the old between the legs. And the whole classroom stopped and the teacher was outraged and I got marched to the office. I was going to be suspended because I could have, ruined his family life or something. My parents, who weren't highly educated, well, as in didn't go on to finish high school, got dragged up to the office. And back in the day, people of that age were very respectful of the school principal, as everyone should be. I was one once. But they just said no, that wasn't going to happen. And in that moment, something really registered with me because they backed me in. They didn't even quite know because it wasn't talked about in that way, but they just said this is not going to happen. And it was a real inspirational moment for me because these days we have the language, we have the understandings, we have different societal norms, but it just wasn't okay that I would pay the price for what was ongoing really harassment, in today's language. So on one level, it's always a funny story, but on the other level, it was quite sense-making for me, and other teachers weren't that happy that I had done it. So I was getting the displeasure, I was getting the punishment. So it stood out in my mind as this is not okay, and I'd tolerated it because it was just annoyance. But another young girl who was perhaps less used to being in the rough and tumble, I think would have found it even more distressing. Yeah. So it just told me that the system, back then, even as a 15-year-old, the system was geared towards normalising that behaviour. I didn't say it that way. Yes. It stayed with me, right?
Yeah.
Fascinating. And then you go and stand up for yourself and then it's like... people are coming down you like a ton of bricks.
Yeah.
What happened to the boys? Like, did they bother you again after that?
There was a bit of teasing of him, and so then there was a bit of backlash to me for a little while, but no one did it to me again.
It's
Now,
like,
this is not a lesson
you know
everyone
exactly. No, it's like, we're not condoning this, but
We're just setting the
I'm not
scene.
about violence.
yes.
No.
But I was already thinking in my head, I was like, I bet you they won't do that again.
There was just something about, I'd known about, my brother's terrific, but I had the confidence. People often say to me, why is it do you have the confidence to do this or that? I had the confidence to stand up for myself, and I knew that was okay. And then to have my parents, who would have been very intense situation, to say, this is not going to happen. And in fact, perhaps we ought to consider, other means. My dad was a policeman, and so what did I take from that? What do I want other people to take from that? Is that we often talk about this from a career perspective, but as an educator, I know these understandings, the shaping of your mind, of your values, of your will, happens way earlier than when you're in a career. So parents think about this much earlier too.
Yeah, those normalized behaviors, the more that they're introduced to you, especially when you're younger, the more used to it you become, and it becomes a part of, who you are. So I love the fact that your parents backed you. Like that was big. That's massive.
Yeah, big deal.
And it's a whole nature nurture thing, isn't it? Like, it just goes to show, like, there's so much to be said for the nurture side of it. Like, you had such a good, upbringing and environment where, you were just used to that. And
I think they were ahead of their time.
yeah, it sounds like it.
I've, at a birthday party I actually acknowledged them. It wasn't gender equity, it wasn't anything equity. It was good family values. We didn't have a lot. We had each other. There was a serving value in our family. Yeah, I think there was something about that, and I thank them for being ahead of their time, for not segregating me into certain, or channeling me into certain roles over other roles. Yeah, it wasn't always perfect. There were things that we all did, but I loved that I got every opportunity. My dad still loves the fact, he reckons I'm better at driving the boat, better at some of the fishing. He actually liked that, There's something rich about that I see other women weren't as comfortable just talking to men, being in men's company. And when you get into leadership, for a long time I was in more men's company than women's company. There's been something really grounding in that.
We need, there's something in that, isn't it? Like, we're trying to, at CEOs for Gender Equity, like, we have, like, really, like, the workplace lens, right? But the reality is that those employees, a lot of them are parents. So, like, what can we do to what can they bring back to their household? And then what can they bring in the discussions around the dinner table? And, I think that there's just such a lack of awareness of the impact that this approach can have. Like, that has set you up for life.
So. I think so. And people ask me about mentors, and I still come back to these stories because they were very deeply and richly shaping, I think, of who I am, how I approach life. Take your work seriously, don't take yourself too seriously.
Yeah.
In our family, don't drink too much of your Kool-Aid, your own Kool-Aid.
Yeah, I love it.
More humble.
Yeah.
Be confident.
Yeah.
But humble to know you're not the most clever person in the room.
Yeah.
I know my family, we always said this too shall pass. So if you're having a great day or a great career, or if you're having a bad day, it'll pass. So just making sure that you're aware of it.
And to be more as a person than just your job. Your job is not the sum total of who you are.
No.
It's a large part of who I am. Yeah, for sure. But don't let it to be the sum total of who you are.
No.
Yeah.
And what I love about everything that you just listed there is there's no gender equity in it. No. It's core, human principles or, and that's like the ideal, is that if we just actually all focused on that by default, the rest will kind of look after itself.
A great aspiration is to never talk about it again.
I know.
To do people out of a job.
Well, Henry and I tell everyone we are really trying so hard to do ourselves out of a job.
Be a commonly decent human being.
Yeah.
So that we don't have to talk about gender equity and looking after people in diversity groups. I'm a strong supporter and advocate. I talk about it a lot, but won't it be great when we don't?
It'd be great. That is the absolute dream, and then everyone benefits, and that's one of our big kind of messages as well, isn't it, Henry? Is that when you do gender equity well, it's for the benefit of everyone.
Yeah.
That's right.
When I'm working on my PhD about gender equity in the mining industry at the minute, and one of the things I love has come through really strong in my research is, so we're going back to basics with some things, with like provision of ablution facilities, right? But when these companies, they're not just looking at, okay, well, the women don't have toilets. They're looking at all of the ablution facilities and going, oh, the men's facilities are disgusting. Who would want to, so let's upgrade those and let's put these in place. And then everyone has a better outcome.
Yes.
So it's having the lens of everybody, not just isolating a certain gender, because when you do that, you're always going to get a little bit of maybe resistance. But if you have this lens of, just good core things which apply to everyone, the rest will look after itself.
It's our aspiration, right?
It is, it is. And we will get there, especially because you're doing some really cool stuff in the public sector, in government. And so I want to ask you, and I share like lots of the government examples in our work more broadly, but can you highlight some of the, initiatives which you've kind of done to improve gender equity in the Public Sector Commission that, what's had the most impact or it's been the most interesting for you?
Well, a couple. We have what's called the Senior Executive Service. It's the senior ranks, really, of the public service. There's about 440, given we have, 175,000 employees. So 440 top-tier people. The government's aspiration was to get to 50%. We, at the pace we were going, apparently we were going to get there in, 2034. And so I said, no, no, that doesn't suit me. And that's just ridiculous, given 71% of the sector is female. So sometimes you've got to go carrot and stick, you need both pressure and support. And so I spoke to the departmental heads and said, we've just got to turn this around. It's actually in our control. We don't need anyone else here. This is us. We're now at 50%. So, 2 years ago, we reached 50%, 12 years or whatever it was, ahead of time. Just a bit of pressure. But also, all of those people are really supportive, but it just wasn't happening. So make it happen. I mean, in the best possible way.
Yeah.
So many fantastic women in the sector. So that's one thing. You can, targets are targets. You can influence them sometimes in pretty direct ways. The other thing we've done recently or last year is, because we're funded for a certain number of people at a senior level, and so when you reach that cap, you're done, basically. And so what I was able to do is organise that every department could have an extra person at that level, and it had to be a woman, and they had to be part of the corporate executive. So what we find at about level 7, which is us, mid-management, that's when the drop-off happens, and they then don't get the corporate executive experience, which means that they then aren't as competitive to be on the corporate executive. So we'll change that. We'll change the structure. We'll bring them straight up into the corporate executive for a year, have that experience, have a mentor, have a team, have the high expectation. And so we had 25 of those last year. Just yesterday I opened it again for another 21. So great women, just fantastic people coming forward who wouldn't get the chance to be on a corporate executive, or we're going to take a lot longer to get there. So an on-the-spot, in-situ training, the heat of the moment. You don't have to go off to 5 more courses. On-the-spot learning, immediate feedback, great stuff.
Yeah.
And not the only other thing, but the other thing I'll mention is for those that aren't meeting their targets, we've set aside all of the rules, and you don't have to go through all the normal recruitment processes. If you believe this person can meet the criteria, you can individually and directly select them. So we've undone recruitment, we've established senior positions for women to grow, learn, develop everything on the spot, and we've already reached our targets. Agencies are doing so much more than that, but there are a couple of things.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing what you can do when you're deliberate with action, like how fast it can go, right? And I know, like, my upbringing, like how my family was, is very, very similar to yours, where, I was, my mom worked during the day, my dad worked at night. So it was kind of like that handover process. Or for when my dad got home, my mom handed me over to my dad, and dad took care of me, did cooking, cleaning the house as well. And they shared the duties, and that was everybody in our family. So I was also curious when I started seeing certain things when I was going to other people's houses. It was like, why are they the only one that's doing that, or why? I learned how to cook from my dad, and so it was always kind of like, I don't get this.
Through
like, what's
the
going
eyes
on?
of children.
Yeah.
You learn a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So I wanted to ask you, like, just with gender equity, like, how would you define gender equity?
Well, I always struggle to define it in a formal sense. In my mind, though, it's mindset, it's fair go. It's pretty basic for me. I know it's much more complex than that, But at the end of the day, it's fair go, taking away all of those other considerations, just a fair go for an individual. And so I'd like to bring it back to pretty basic concepts. You know, over time, you know, we've come from different points in time and looking at gender equity. I come from an era where there was this kind of point in time for me where it was a bit cringy.
Why was that, do you think?
Oh, the fact that you'd get a job because you were a woman, it's not enough, you know? And I didn't want to be the person that got a job because I was a woman. I wanted to be the right person, or, you know, at that moment in time, the best person for the role, and I happened to be a woman, not the other way around. So I found that time where, as I use the word cringy, it's probably not a very technical term, but, you know, I found that an awkward time. I also, during that period, you know, when I was a bit younger, the whole idea of what we called at the time women's lib was, it seemed to me as a young person to be an anti-men thing.
Yeah.
I could never buy into that. So it has changed, you know, over time, hasn't it? So the conception of it now is different, and now I'm, you know, I simply just call it a fair go for people, and it's shifted over time, and I think we're much more sophisticated, and the whole idea of unconscious bias, you know, has been really important, you know, a real important development, hasn't it? That
Massively.
people aren't always out to do women in. But during that period, you know, when I talk about that kind of cringe moment, there have been experiences early on in my career where you just had, you know the teenage movies where you have mean girls?
Yeah.
There are mean girls.
So mean.
Mean women.
Yeah.
And I've had a bit of my share of that. And because I was a very young Director General when I was the Director General of Education, I probably shouldn't have got the job. What I mean by that was, you know, I was seen as younger, greener, and there were some people who after that, you know, who didn't get the job, who were women, who were really difficult. So for me, you know, what is gender equity? It's a fair go. It's not an anti-men thing. It's not, you know, mean girls being mean. It's just giving everyone, just being a decent human being and giving everyone a fair go.
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
Yeah. Great.
And that's how that's and I totally agree. I think, you know, if you're talking maybe this cringy period, you know, like particularly like you know, not so much in the last couple of years, but before
absolutely.
that, I agree. And it physically, when I hear, it still continues in some forums today where it's very man bashing, and I'm just like, oh, it does make me physically cringe, because I'm like, that's just, it's not helpful. It's not inspiring. You know, you're just gonna, you know, foster more resistance and division, and that's not what it's about.
You know, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, for or against, and there was a period where, you know, as the youngest Director General and woman, I felt like I was rolled out a fair bit, you know, to talk, and sometimes I felt that tension. But am I talking to the right people? There's all these women in the crowd.
Yeah.
Not that men have to be fixed any more than women do.
Yeah,
but,
that's right.
you know, yeah, it was. I felt like I was often talking to the converted.
Yes.
You know, which is why last year, and I think Ash, you came, didn't you?
Yes.
I required really all of the heads of government departments to come in the room, and all of the men. Like usually you're talking to the women, but you know, we're all in this shared endeavour. Has to be a shared endeavour, surely.
It has to be a collaboration. Like we all have to have the conversation. We all have to work towards improving.
Yeah.
Right. Did you ever feel like you were pigeonholed into certain, you know, either areas of business or certain projects or anything like that?
I don't know that I was. You know, I thought to myself, would I be able to make the transition from education to be the public sector commissioner? For those that don't know, I oversee all of the government departments. So, you know, I wondered about that, whether I was pigeonholing myself. You know, I'm an educator. I became involved in education policy. I was the head of education. Could I do something else? You know, I don't know that other people pigeonholed me, but I'll share this little story with you. You know, the thing about, you asked before about your career, are there moments in time?
Yeah.
I was a teacher. I'd worked in the Northwest a lot with Aboriginal people, remote communities. I saw principals and I knew that I could be at least as good as them, because there were some great ones and there were some pretty horrible ones. I won a job to become a deputy principal, and I was offered a Leafy Green school in Perth. I was living in Geraldton at the time. A Leafy Green school in Perth, or Carnarvon, where there were lots of social problems. And I had a heart for disadvantaged people and vulnerable kids, really. So anyway, off I go to Carnarvon, and I arrive and I meet the principal. Now, back in the day, for those that don't know, you had what was called a deputy principal female and a deputy principal male in primary schools.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
That was a thing.
Yeah, that's a thing. And everyone knew the deputy principal male had the keys to the storeroom, very important, ran the camps, ran the sports carnivals, like they got all the fun stuff.
Fun stuff, yeah.
And the deputy principal female, did the morning tea roster,
Stop it.
who washes the tea towels, looked after the canteen,
Took the minutes.
all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Right? So I roll up. I'm 24, so quite young. I don't know where I got this from. People call it ballsy, but I don't know. So I rock up to the new principal, who was also new, and I'm Sharyn O'Neill. Pleased to meet you. Really excited to be here. Really want to help make a difference. But I just want to say to you, I don't do tears, tampons, or tea towels. And this poor, wonderful, wonderful principal, Ken, his face, dropped like, oh no, what have we got here? I want the keys to the story. So
Good on you,
he had a
Sharyn.
moment, right?
Yeah.
He could have said, well, actually, they're not the roles. The roles are this and the roles are that.
Yeah.
He took a moment, and I thought, I don't know how long I'm going to last here. And he said, you know what? I reckon that's fair enough. And again, he backed me. So he's a big backing number 2, right?
Yeah, I was supposed to say that.
Yeah, and so that also was a really important point for me. I don't, to this point, where do you get the confidence from? Women often, when I tell that story, women often ask me, where do you get that confidence from? I think it's, again, something in the background. But that was a very instrumental point to me because, again, it reinforces, as you said, things can change, and they can change like that.
See, every time you spoke up, there was a backing, and it gives you even more confidence. But it's like, every time I speak up, things change.
Yeah.
You go, okay, that's the direction that you go.
And it wasn't that hard.
Yeah.
It was hard for the guy to hand the keys over, I've got to tell you. And in the end, I actually found those things weren't my thing.
Yeah.
I could hand the keys back, but I had them for a moment.
Yeah.
I wanted to do the
got 'em.
policy. I wanted to do the measurement of student achievement, as it turned out. I wanted to do all those things. And it's a great theme that we're talking about, because the third time that stands out for me is when I first became Director General, and the Premier at the time rang me. Congratulations. And I said, yep, I'm really excited, but I'm a single parent, and I need to say to you that I will have to go. I want to go. I will go to my every sports carnival of my sons.
Yeah.
And every major event, because I need to be there. And if that doesn't suit you, Premier, it's okay. I get that. You should choose someone else. Again, don't know where that came from. And he was wonderful, and he said, "Yep, we've got that. That's fine." And so there were times when my son was very sporting. He'd be running in the running race. I'd be on the phone to the Premier. Go, Jack, go. Oh, yes, sorry. And that was tense. It was hard. It was. I'm not Pollyanna. It wasn't easy.
Sure.
But again, having your authorising person support you in that way.
Yeah.
So it is something about owning your truth, speaking up, and being almost comfortable with the ramifications, whether they're good or bad. But this is me, and I love seeing that in young girls, young women, young career people, old career people. Just know yourself, because you're going to get battered around, right? It's life. That's life.
Yeah, I think, and as leaders too, I'm like, you always have to remember, it's your words hold weight and your actions hold weight. So in the lives of people and the stories of people, it's like, how do you want to be how do you want to be remembered in these stories? It's do you want to be a good memory? Do you want to be a positive memory, or do you want to be, a really detrimental thought in someone's mind, in their story, in their life story? It's like, how do you want to be remembered? And it's like leading with kindness and supporting people as you're going. So I think those moments are really, really genuinely important. Like every single time that you spoke up, it was always a backing, and he could, like you said, could have easily said, well, this is how it is, and you just have to deal with it.
But that's a challenge for me too, as a leader. So when people, am I creating an environment that allows for that thing, that very thing that benefited me? Sometimes I've gotten it right, not always.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really neat challenge for myself. Do I back people, women particularly? Am I the mean girl? Am I the supporter? Am I the backer? They're all deliberate choices. And so gender equity on the big scene is very important, but it's one by one by one by one.
It is. It's a culmination of these small things which leads to that kind of more broader societal level change. But what I've taken from the examples that you've shared, it's kind of like a bit like the approach that we take at CEOs for gender equity is you're simply those people, like that principal, he was just going with the motions. That's what had always been done. But what you did was not shoving it down his throat, but just, hey, by the way, I'm going to take those keys. Oh, yeah. So you're kind of nudging. You're not shoving it down his throat. You're kind of nudging and just giving a different perspective, and that's kind of the work we do at CEOs for gender equity. And that is, 99% of people have a good intent, have a true intent. Most people do, but they just don't know.
Or haven't thought about it, had the space.
That's
to
it.
think about it. Haven't had the challenge in this way, or they immediately become defensive, as any of these people could have. So I remember once standing up at a conference and calling out that principal because I knew he was there, and thanking him for what was probably a small thing in his mind. I don't think he went away and lost sleep over it, but monumental in my mindset. And I think that's what I want to imbue, not in women, because it's not as if I've got the power to do that, but if there's any influence, it's speak up. So people who work for me, some of them love it, some of them don't. I say to women, I met a new group of young women just 2 days ago, or on Monday actually. When you come and meet with me or in this commission, you need to speak. So if you come into a meeting room and there's 10 people there and it's an hour-long meeting, you've got your 6 minutes. Now, I don't literally mean that, but I want them, they need to be visible.
Hold space.
And hold their space, and mostly they're frightened. Just ask a question. Doesn't matter. Just be there. Because I say to them, otherwise, it looks like entertainment, and I don't need you in the room. So as a teacher, I can't help myself. I'm constantly trying to teach. Be present. Don't be on your phone in that way. Be prepared. Think about who's in the room. Think about how you can have some influence for good. So I think there's lots about mindset and preparation and visibility that I think are really important.
And obviously you're, as well as all that, like you're leading by example by still having that approach that you do, which is you're getting your point across, but it's in a like a gentle way, or a non-conflict. It's not confrontational. It's just you're just getting your point across and letting people.
You don't have to be.
Have to be
loud. It's tricky though, Ash. Sometimes people think they've got to be like their leader. So I will have visibility because I have history. I've been at this level now 19 years. So I've got some runs on the board, I guess. I tend to be louder and confident, perhaps. Not everyone's like that, but I try and talk to them about, you don't have to be me or this one or that one, but find your authority. It can be your subject matter expertise. It can be you ask really insightful questions. Find your authority. So I keep coming back to mindset for women. It's so important about how they how they are in the situation. Don't, you know, you don't have to be a marshmallow, you know, you don't have to be soft, but don't be too hard. You know,
Yeah.
finding the balance again to be a great leader.
100%. We are very quickly, unfortunately, running out of time, but I wanted to just round up with one final question, Sharyn, which is, you know, in all, you know, your life journey and the amazing work you're doing as a public sector commissioner, thank you. You know, we're hearing a little bit, because the profile of gender equity has gone so high, especially in the last few years, we're hearing a little bit about, you know, that there's kind of a bit of a resistance or a bit of a some of our members and other CEOs are getting a bit of a backlash. So, you know, have you, in your, you know, experience, faced some kind of advocacy or resistance to what you're trying to do? And if so, how did you overcome that?
Look, I don't think so. We're a highly feminised workforce. If there is resistance, it's never obvious. I can think those days are gone. It's a little more underground, perhaps. People are so challenged with how much there is to do and to achieve, and the government, you know, has a terrific, ambitious, you know, agenda. So sometimes the thing that I will hear is, "Oh, I'd love to do all that, but I don't really have time." What, you don't, you know, have time to treat people decently? You don't have time to represent your 70% of your workforce that are women? What, you don't have time for workforce planning? You don't have time? You know, I understand it, of course, academically I can understand it, but this is more than, or not quite 3/4 of your workforce that you're talking about here. This is the future. This is, so when people see it as a bolt-on, they'll never have time because there's always something more demanding, you know, more important. So, you know, I hear a bit of that, but I'm surrounded by very strong women public sector leaders and male public sector leaders. They're committed to it. So I don't have to convince people of what we're doing here. I think the challenge for me is taking people on a journey where we can reconsider those underlying norms. Like I said, with recruitment, we're trying to change recruitment. We're trying to change some of those legacy historical systems that are in place, and taking people on that journey. It can be different. Moving from a positive will to really intentional decision making and action in a fast-paced environment, that's the challenge for me. But I'm really optimistic. Surrounded by wonderful people, not only in my commission, but in all the other public sector agencies. So I reckon we're on a course for great good. We just got to stay the course.
That's great. And I always say, I'm like, whether it's in work or outside of work, people always find time for the things they care about. Right. So when organizations do say that, it's like, you'll find the time if you wanted to do it.
Yeah, I don't have the time either.
Like,
Public sector
busy.
commissioner, you know. But what I love about, you know, some of the actions that, and like I said, I reference examples from, you know, the public sector all the time in CTE events and external meetings, because, you know, what you've done is really incredible. You know, you've beat the target years in advance. You've taken away clear barriers. You know, you're actually you're building the pipeline of women. You've identified that you've got a gap. You're building the pipeline. You know, it's just, excuse me, it's no, and none of it's rocket science, but it's just really, excuse me.
Give the woman some water.
Yeah, sorry. Just hold that thought. I might need to.
While you're coughing.
I was going to say, what's next? Like, all of this that you've already accomplished, I'm like, what's next?
Yeah, it's, I mean, so much for the public sector.
Yeah.
So many aspirations I have. We're looking particularly at talent. And, you know, what does a talent pipeline mean, you know, more broadly, but, you know, obviously including women and other diversity groups. We're introducing this, you know, enormously exciting learning initiative for the whole sector. We're reviewing agencies and, you know, helping them on an improvement pathway. So there's exciting stuff for the public sector. It underpins the services to Western Australia. So, you know, I'm immensely proud of everything that happens there. On this front, though, moving again from, I mean, targets are important, but moving to, not away from them, because, you know, we'll always have them, but to embedding the practice, embedding the mindset, as I said, so that we don't have to keep returning to these discussions. And that's the long-term aspiration.
Yeah, that's great.
Love it. And, you know, I love the work that you do at the Public Sector Commission. I do use it as an example in lots of different forums because, you know, you identified where you were, you set a goal for improvement. You've created this amazing pipeline of future female leaders by giving an extra head count to each, you know, and it's just so strategic and focused. It just goes to show that, you know, an organisation which represents your 175,000 employees can do these things, and they've been so successful and so impactful. So thank you so much for all of the insights and those stories are just gold from today.
So many more questions.
Yeah, I know. We're going to have to ask you to come back at some stage because
we've got this line that I've been using for the public sector: think, rethink, solve, deliver. You know, it's really simple but powerful. We can think and rethink the positions we have on things. Most things are in our hands, like in every other industry. Most things are in your hands. And so I'm here right now. I won't be here forever. So I'm here right now. I have a responsibility. I want to be able to look back and say, I used my moment to the greatest effect. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
And
so on board with that.
100%, and that's what we're kind of what CEOs for Gender Equity is all about as well. Is, you know, as a CEO and heads of state, you know, you're in an incredible position of influence, and so it's with all the 175 employees, but it's other, you know, other CEOs, other heads of state who you can inspire to do the same, and that's what we're built on, and that's what's that peer to peer, you know, influence is so powerful.
Well, who else, if not those that work in government? You know, you have the power to change people's lives, not just those of you that are in your employment, there's lots of them, but we provide the services to the whole community. We keep the fabric of community together. So do people in the not-for-profit sector, the private sector, all the other groups I know that you are working so closely with and supporting. All of those senior people, all of my senior people, you know, who else can do it if we can't? So we have such an opportunity. You don't want to leave that go wasting, do we? I think it's a really important moment in time, but so is every other day, and people before us and people after us as well.
Thank you so much. Keep up the amazing gender equity work, and thank you so much for everything that you've shared today. We have thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, thank you to you guys. You're strong supporters. I'm always really appreciative of that, and we need all the help we can get as well. So thank you. Thanks for today.
Thank you.
Thank you. We hope this conversation has sparked a passion, revealed new insights, and inspired you to take action in the pursuit of gender equity.
Remember, change begins with each one of us. So until next time, keep raising your voice, keep championing equity, and keep making a difference.
This is Ashley McGrath
And Henry Cooper,
signing off from Voices of Gender Equity, real and raw stories of impact.